Queen Victoria looms large over most of the 19th century. When she died at 81, Queen left secret, detailed instructions on how to handle her body and what items to place in her coffin. And because royals never hear the word no, some of those items were downright bizarre. So today, we are taking a deep dive into the weird stuff in Queen Victoria's coffin, but not a literal dive. Show some respect. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to Memory Lane channel. After that, leave a comment and let us know what other unusual last requests you'd like to hear about. Alright, who's ready for the worst scavenger hunt in history? At the time of her death, Victoria was Britain's longest reigning monarch. She lived a life full of responsibilities, loved and intrigue, but her 9 children were often a vehement opposition to some of the ways Victoria lived her life and resentful of those with whom she was closest. So when it came time for the Queen to make her final arrangements, she knew her wishes would require an element of secrecy so they could be observed, especially the things Queen Victoria wanted to be buried with. At the end of her life, Victoria summoned her secretary, who was also her chief lady-in-waiting, and dictated 12 pages of specific instructions regarding her funeral and burial. The lady-in-waiting hand-delivered the instructions to the Queen's physicians, Sir James Reed. According to the author, Tony Renell, a Reed family descendant, wrote a book on the doctor and his famous patient, but the contents of the secret instructions were forbidden by the Royal College censors. When Renell was invited by the Renfield family to research her archives, he came across the hidden instructions written just for Victoria's death. He was able to successfully publish his research, and for the first time, Victoria's final wishes came to light. So it was her doctor who followed through with all her wishes. He was the lone person who knew how Queen Victoria died. He nursed her day and night during her final moments, and it was his name she spoke as she expired. He followed through with each of her requests, no matter how bizarre. One of the first strange items on Victoria's list was a plaster cast of Prince Albert's hand, made shortly after his death. When her husband Albert died unexpectedly at age 42, Victoria was devastated. Her approach to his loss was an enormous inspiration to grieving people across the Western world. For example, she is a big reason why we associate the color black with mourning. But the Queen took things a bit further. For years after his death, she had Albert's former servant attend to his morning rituals. Servant brought hot water, his shaving brush, cup, and towels to his room every morning. His valet also continued to bring in the suits he would wear that day. At the end of the day, the servant would return and remove the items, only to repeat the same the next day and the next, like the British remix of The Sixth Sense. Victoria kept her bedroom draped in black and decorated with Albert's visage in photos and portraits. She slept nightly with the plaster cast of his hand, like a teddy bear in the Tim Burton movie. She probably figured it was only fitting that she sleep with it eternally. In a macabre mixture of death and birth, Queen Victoria's secret instructions demanded her entire funeral, from horses to mourning attire, be clad in white. She also insisted she would be buried wearing the white burial veil from her 1840 wedding to Prince Albert. Listen, she was really into the guy. In fact, it was the young monarch Victoria who broke earlier traditions and began the custom of wearing entirely white wedding gowns. Her choice came partly from the desire to symbolize her purity, as both she and Albert were inexperienced lovers on the wedding night. Today, pretty much every wedding dress is white. At the end, perhaps Victoria returned to her white bridal veil as a symbol of the happiness relationship of her life and of her hope that she would join Albert in heaven, where she could maybe hang out with Jimi Hendrix. Here is where Victoria's instructions for what should be placed in her coffin became a little complex. While her family knew that she asked to be buried wearing her wedding ring, only the Queen's secretary and physician knew she wanted to be buried wearing a second wedding ring on her left ring finger. This ring was given to her by a man other than her husband, a man she came to know very well during the 40 years she lived after Albert's death. Victoria's relationship with Scottish servant John Brown was extremely controversial, particularly within the British royal family. She had sent for him during the early years of her widowhood, since she remembered that Prince Albert had spoken very highly of Brown. The Queen and the Gelhi, that's a Celtic term for servants, became close friends. He was the only person in Victoria's orbit who could get away with criticizing her and speaking to her in a familiar tone. Author Tony Renell brought to light the story of the second wedding ring, and more recently, historian A.N. Wilson argued that Victoria and Brown did indeed have a romantic relationship, but that it was never consummated. Well, according to Wilson, they slept in the same bed or just hugged one another. Whatever you say, pal. Wilson points to a deathbed confession of a Scottish minister who claimed he had secretly married the couple. Whatever their relationship or marital status, the Queen's children utterly despised Brown and were angry with their mother for the rest of her life, even after Brown's death. So angry was Victoria's son and heir, King Edward VI, and once his mother was good and buried, They removed or had destroyed every monument and mentions of John Brown at all royal properties. What the new king did not know was that his mother was laid to rest clutching her favorite photo and a lock of hair from her beloved John Brown and wearing Brown's mother's wedding ring on her finger. So, who's going to tell him? Queen Victoria was buried in a sea of sentimental souvenirs amid a variety of flowers. Her daughter-in-law Alexandra of Denmark brought fresh flowers to the casket before it was sealed. Victoria's doctor and confidant Sir James Reed used the new Queen Alexandra's flowery gift as a means to obscure secret items held in Victoria's left hand. Chief among the floral grave offerings was a request made by the Queen herself. She asked that a sprig of heather be placed on her body as it was made ready for burial. A flowering heather is a Scottish symbol and perhaps served as a remembrance of happy times with her family at Balmoral Castle, as well as the adventurous time she shared with the Scottish servant and champion John Brown. Queen Victoria was laid to rest in an unmanned museum where she had built years earlier to house her beloved Albert's remains. At his death, she ordered a life-size sculpture of Albert in response, his head inclining towards the sculpture of his wife, which was placed atop his sarcophagus. Her own matching statue was put in storage to be displayed upon her own death. Victoria, in marble repose, appears just as imagined herself, even at the end, young and in love, like the Bryan Adams song. However, when she died 40 years after Albert, everyone had forgotten where her grave and statue was stored, which must have been awkward. So the Queen was initially buried without the statue, and it was several months before it was found, boarded up behind a wall in Windsor Castle. Queen Victoria's posthumous instructions were so meticulous that she even planned exactly who she wanted to lift her body into the final resting place. Once her doctor and secretary placed most of the sentimental items into the coffin, certain family members and servants were gathered to move her body from bed to casket. Lifting at her head were the doctor and chief lady in waiting. Lifting along one side of her body were her son and heir, the new King Edward VI, her grandson, German Kaiser Wilhelm II, and another of her sons, Prince Arthur, Duke of Hainaut and Stratham. Lifting on the other side of her body were three of her most devoted servants. The coffin was already full of the sentimental items Victoria wanted to keep by her side in death, but her tiny form, just 5 feet tall, was lowered into the collected treasures with room to spare. It was at this moment that her ladies gathered round, assisted by the doctor to make any necessary adjustments, and added a few final secret items. A relative and attendant then left the room, which allowed Reed to place John Brown's mother's wedding band on the Queen's left ring finger and tuck her Scottish companion's photo and lock of hair into the same hand. This casket was then sealed shut. Victoria's secret indeed. Sir James Reed served as Victoria's primary physician for at least 15 years of her life. He was devoted to her and she to him, trusting no one in her family with her final wishes. It was only natural for her to turn to him as the keeper of her life secret. The detailed instructions prepared by the Queen's secretary still exist. They were held in the possession of Reed's descendants as part of his collections of personal papers, and the royal family isn't happy about it. The late Princess Margaret reportedly confronted members of the Reed family in public, accusing them of having something that belongs to us. Give it back, she demanded. But the royal demands were unsuccessful, and the list remains in the Reed archive. So what do you think? What unusual item would you want to be buried with? Let us know in the comments below. And while you are at it, check out some of the other videos in our channel.